We're gonna try something new today, though. I'm just gonna watch some YouTube videos, kind of do some commentary, mostly on some like news and stuff, because honestly, I'm fairly interested in current events and stuff like that. We're gonna watch some Phillip DeFranco. I gotta fix this camera a little. There we go.
Story that has blown up this week. Some of you requested it, and to be honest, I do think it is genuinely one of the dumbest stories to get attention this week. So let's get through this Demi Lovato news. If you didn't see, she was feuding with a froyo shop. This because Demi wrote about her experience going to a shop in LA called The Big Chill, saying finding it extremely hard to order froyo from The Big Chill when you have to walk past tons of sugar-free cookies / other diet foods before you get to the counter. Do better, please. Hashtag diet culture vultures. And adding that she plans to use the hashtag to call out brands that use harmful diet messaging that can perpetuate and support eating disorders. Now, as far as The Big Chill, reportedly they DM'd her saying that they were sorry if she found anything offensive. Also responding publicly, sharing that they carry items for people with dietary needs and restrictions like diabetes, celiac disease, vegans, and more. Right? And all of that in addition to their more indulgent items. Demi responded to this by saying that it should be clearer in the labels that those products are there to accommodate certain restrictions. You know, following this, you had some people saying, thank you, Demi, for speaking up for us. Others saying, you're being ridiculous. Or essentially,
I can understand both perspectives here. So, I mean, obviously, if you're someone who suffers from an eating disorder, things like this are going to be like pretty triggering. And diet culture is very real, and toxic diet culture is even more real. Toxic diet culture actually is why there are so many eating disorders, you know, within our nation, but also within the world, you know, just like toxic dieting cultures, or, you know, malpractice even of dieting cultures, like awful medical practices that people just believe should be done in the name of dieting, or just body modification in general. You know, in South America there are things that are done, but there are even things done in America that are harmful. So I totally get where she's coming from, and probably yes, I think a lot of companies could do better on packaging marketing, because, you know, they're playing into that group insecurity and fear there, and they're trying to, you know, they're trying to remind you should be dieting, keep you, you know, in fear of chasing that perfect body. So I definitely understand what she's saying. I understand why some people think it's not a big deal, but those people also are probably all people who have never suffered with body images or struggled with their own weight. So I get why you think it's not a big deal, but that's just because it's never been a big deal to you. But it is a big deal to some people, and not only is it a big deal, it's like a pretty big deal, and it does go on to perpetuate a toxic culture within our society that does nothing but hurt people. So is it really such a bad thing to call it out and try and clean it up?
saying you're attacking this small froyo shop for having sugar-free options. Right, you had big names chiming in with The Big Chill actually reposting a story from Mia Khalifa where she said to support local businesses that accommodate dietary restrictions and allergies. Though we also saw the likes of Jamila Jamil supporting Demi, writing, but if an eating disorder advocate says she sees products that are positioned as guilt-free and it is potentially triggering, that doesn't mean she's too stupid to remember that diabetics exist. It just means we need to change the marketing of products that are for people's medical needs. Guilt-free is diet culture terminology. We need to stop using that fucking term. Demi also ended up apologizing to the shop in an 8-minute Instagram video, saying her message should have come across clearer. Also trying to explain that seeing stuff like that is difficult for her, that she's sensitive about this.
My intentions were not...
Yeah, she was probably triggered.
Come in and bully a small business. That was not it. I walked in, was so triggered that I left without froyo, and it made me really sad.
Also, I've seen...
Yeah, and her ED reacted.
There were rumors and reports that Demi actually donated to The Big Chill, that now they're changing their menu. The Big Chill actually addressed that this morning, saying they haven't changed their menu, nor have they received a donation. Also saying they haven't heard from her since her sorry not sorry apology on Monday. Though, I'm sure they didn't mind the attention. According to the LA Times, the shop went from 6,000 followers before Demi's post to now over 32,000. I've also had friends in the area saying there are lines out the door to get into this place now. And as far as my reaction to this, this, and also I just want to preface it, this is a reaction from someone that's actually struggled with an eating disorder. I feel like in general, diet culture, yes, can be incredibly toxic. It should be all about long-term health, long-term goals. In that way, it's one reason why I'm glad Demi Lovato is no longer pushing detox teas. But here, to me, this feels like it got completely overblown and ended up just being bullying and attacking a small business. Right? Not the ideal or best thing to do with a small business in an industry that's just been ravaged over the past year.
I see what he's saying, and yes, that is what ultimately happened here. But I do not think that was Demi's intention. I think that was a very emotional response from someone who has a lot of trauma based around diet culture, confronted by diet culture in a place they did not expect to be, while also trying to acquire food. So, already a triggering sort of struggling event, you know, for someone with an eating disorder. I'm going to go get food. That's a heightened anxiety state. I'm going to walk in. Now I see diet culture stuff. That's going to make my eating disorder scream at me in the worst ways possible, especially because I'm trying to get food that's not a part of diet culture. So now I'm being berated by myself, or not myself, but my eating disorder, but also physically by these labels and things in front of me. So all of a sudden you feel like you're in a not safe space. I can imagine an adrenaline rush starts, you know, and you feel very attacked because you are being attacked by a part of yourself or an eating disorder, the way it's developed in your mind. So it makes perfect sense to me that in the heat of the moment, she blasted them on social media, much like any other person would, by the way. And yeah, it came off as bullying because she's a person of stature. And yes, there's a truth that like anyone who like has a mass following should try and be careful with what they say. But we are all emotional creatures. We all suffer from trauma. We all suffer from triggers, and we all have emotional responses to them. So I don't know. Like I find myself more on Demi's side in this one. Like, maybe it wasn't the best way to go about it, but she had a completely valid point. And if anything, her reactions to how things were is a justification as to why things need to change, because they provoke responses like that. They make people feel unsafe like that. Just saying.
A better way to do this, and it feels weird that someone that is essentially arguing that words matter didn't think about her words when bringing up this issue that she had. But yeah, that is kind of where I'm going to end this. On the notion of the words matter, and I feel like if I go any longer, I'm just going to kind of unnecessarily punch down on her, because based off of the documentary and just her post in general, it feels like she's going through a lot. And whether it be me or Demi Lovato,
I haven't seen that documentary.
We could all benefit.
I don't know much about her story,
words do matter,
other than she suffered from an eating disorder.
Educate rather than maybe tear down. A story that is just blown up. The news that Columbus police shot and killed a black teenager yesterday right before the Derek Chauvin verdict was read. The girl who was shot and killed was identified as 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant by a spokesperson for Franklin County Children's Services.
I had not heard about this.
There were a lot of different stories and narratives. You had Micaiah's aunt, Hazel Bryant, telling the Daily Beast that adult women had come to the foster home Micaiah lived at and started an altercation with her niece. Her niece then calling the police. Hazel then claiming that Micaiah grabbed a knife to defend herself and was fending off a physical assault when police arrived, but with her also telling a local outlet that Micaiah had dropped the knife before she was shot. But then you also had police testimony and, most importantly, body cam footage. Right, so during a news conference late last night, you had police saying the shooting happened after they received a 911 call just after 4:30, saying they got that call from someone who said that women were trying to stab them before hanging up, with the law enforcement officials also playing segments of the body cam footage from the officer who fired the shot, saying that the footage showed the victim lunging at two others with a knife. And in the graphic video, which I can't show here because YouTube will likely kill the video, you see the officer getting out of the car as Micaiah appears to chase someone who falls down to the sidewalk. You also have someone there that appears to be kicking at the person that's down. Micaiah then lunges at another person who appears to be holding a dog. The officer yells, "Get down," several times before quickly firing at least 4 shots. Very notably, in the slow motion capture of the video shown by police, it appears to show that the knife is in her hand at that
Why not a
time.
taser?
Then collapses on the ground, and in the body cam footage, you see the knife next to her as officers attempt CPR, which is why you had a good number of people saying that Hazel Bryant must have just seen things wrong or misremembered, or she's just outright lying.
I'm glad glad to see some sunlight. Haven't caught you during the day for some time. Wherever, I guess. Yeah, no, it's part of the new schedule.
Ended up being dispersed around 10 p.m. Other protesters taking
now that I work third shift.
Many gathering in front of the Columbus Police Department
but it's been taking a while to adjust, not gonna lie.
Twitter, people like Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP, tweeting, the emotional contrast between the Derek Chauvin verdict and the killing of Micaiah Brown is exactly why we must not use small wins to justify the end of a large fight.
Exactly.
Ben Crump, the lawyer of George Floyd's family, writing, as we breathed a collective sigh of relief today, a community in Columbus felt the sting of another police shooting as Columbus police killed an unarmed 15-year-old black girl named Micaiah Bryant. Others also condemning the officer, describing what he did as immediately shooting Micaiah instead of trying to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, where was the de-escalation? Where was the taser? Where was the foot pursuit? Like where was like the even tackling? Fucking tackling and handcuffing.
What her aunt said happened, despite how Ben Crump described the situation, we have video footage, slow motion footage, that shows Micaiah with a police officer present lunging at someone with a knife in hand. Or with comments like, the officer isn't a murderer, he did his job and shot someone who went out with a knife and tried to stab another black person. Though that still wasn't enough for some people. Some
taser, de-escalate, yeah.
Don't care what she was swinging at other people. If you can take a white man with an AK-47 or an AR-15 into custody alive,
yes.
You cannot shoot a 15-year-old girl with
or that dude who had a fucking gun in his lap who shut his car door that they did nothing for. Are you kidding me?
Columbus police identified the officer who shot Micaiah as Nicholas Reardon, who reportedly has only been with the department since December of 2019. But that's the story as it is right now. I'll also link to the body cam footage. I can't include it in today's show. But with what we are seeing about the situation right now, I would love to know your thoughts here. Right? Are you in the camp of the officer did nothing wrong here? He did the best he could with what was happening in front of him. He saw someone being attacked. Or no, are you in the camp of the police officer is wrong here, as some have suggested he should have used a taser instead of immediately going
there were so many other options.
Else? If so, what do you think that would have been? But yeah, I would definitely love to know your thoughts here, especially because if you look online right now, there are a bunch of different narratives.
Fucking police have bulletproof vests. You're telling me you can't tackle someone with a knife?
Have this other information, but also keep in mind this is still a developing story. And then finally today we should talk about Attorney General Merrick
a child with a knife, mind you.
The Department is launching a sweeping civil rights investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. And in his statement, Garland said that the inquiry will decide if the MPD engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing, and adding, yesterday's the state criminal trial does not address potentially
they literally do
in Minneapolis. Public safety requires public
so many right there in that city.
Discriminatory conduct and treated people with behavioral health disabilities in an unlawful manner. Garland also saying that the investigators will review MPD policies, training, supervision, accountability systems, as well as the tactics used against protesters during the protests last summer.
Tear gas is a chemical weapon. That's technically a war crime. I don't even understand how people are able to get away with that. We literally occupy other countries on the grounds of they are using chemical weapons on their people. That's tear gas. Like when we say that, more often than not, that's their police force using tear gas on their protesters, and we're like, oh, they're using chemical weapons on their people. That's a war crime. That's fucking terrible. We gotta go colonize them and destabilize their entire fucking economy and then leave it in shambles and create a power vacuum that fucks up the region for decades. And that's what we do. And then we turn around and tear gas our citizens with our own police force. By that logic, any country would technically have the UN's permission, assuming that's what we're getting, to occupy us for using chemical weapons on our own people. But no one does because we have so many weapons, and from what I understand, the UN is mostly controlled by the US and its allies, or the UK and its allies, depending on the time period. I mean, obviously every country has a voice, but there are things that determine which countries have more of a voice than others, and the way things have shaked out, I'm sure you're aware. I don't know if you guys know, but Britain used to run the world, so like they're pretty high up on the list. China's pretty high up on the list. I believe Russia is too. Japan more than likely, I would assume. Possibly Australia, definitely America. More than likely Canada's fairly high up there too. Mexico might not be too far down the list.
these kinds of probes under former attorneys general Sessions.
I don't know, actually, no. I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing there, but I do know there's some sort of hierarchy structure
that basically banned the DOJ from pursuing what's known as consent decrees, which are settlements that establish reform measures for police departments that are found to have violated civil rights protection. But actually, regarding that, last Friday, Garland reversed that decision, making it one of the Biden administration's first major moves to hold police forces accountable in civil rights cases. And as far as what happens next, Garland has said that the probe is already underway, also adding that if the investigators find that the department has engaged in any unlawful practices, they will 1. Issue a public report, and 2. The Federal Civil Rights Division will try to work with the Minneapolis police to find ways to fix the issue. But regarding this investigation, it could take a while. Reportedly, it could take months or even years. And ultimately, with this story, and honestly, anything else that stood out to you today, I'd love to know your thoughts in those comments.
Well, that's all we got on Phil.
Unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Find the defendant.
Yeah, here's the sentencing.
Verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number.
Look at how he doesn't even react, dude.
Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2.
This man's just been found guilty of 3 crimes.
An eminently dangerous act.
3 counts of murder. And this is his response.
This 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m.
I take one of 2 things away from this. To me,
number 19.
It looks like he either A, has a plan, has a plan to fight this some way already in place, has discussed it, and is ready for this outcome. Or B, he just doesn't feel anything about it. And I find both of those equally hard to believe.
Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019.
Now, after the verdict was read, Derek Chauvin was led away in handcuffs, appearing to show little reaction to what had happened. All right, let's get at some of this in the debrief now. We bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae. She is, as always, live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, Julia, let's start with what's next for Derek Chauvin. What will happen leading up to his sentencing?
Well, Michael, right now he is behind bars in a prison facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He was taken into custody and then transferred there where he's going to await sentencing. He's in a single cell. It's called administrative segregation, where they keep him away from the general population. And in the meantime, for the next 8 weeks, the parties in this case, the state and
we'll switch up here, not too long. I just want to see a little more about
the sentence
where things are at
Chauvin,
here.
whether or not it should be a certain amount of time or a less amount of time is what the defense is going to be arguing. But also they'll be talking about the aggravating factors and filing those briefs. And ultimately, 8 weeks from now is when the judge is going to set that date for the sentencing hearing so that he can hear those arguments and ultimately make that decision.
All right, Julia, let's move on and talk about how this judge will go about deciding the sentence for Derek Chauvin. The state is citing several factors in order to get a stiffer sentence. Take us through those.
Right. The state filed this notice many months ago in this case because they told the court that they would be planning to seek what's called an upward departure from the sentencing guidelines, wanting to get a harsher sentence.
Yeah, I did see that. The state requested
is that they say that George Floyd was a particularly vulnerable victim. He was handcuffed at the time of this arrest.
They almost had him in the car.
With particular cruelty.
Yeah.
And that Chauvin abused his position of authority. They also say that there were 3 or more offenders who were involved, noting that this was done with the other officers and co-defendants in this case, and also that this criminal conduct was witnessed by children, those minor bystanders that we actually heard from at trial. So the judge is going to be the one who's going to make a decision on whether the state has proven that those aggravating factors exist. There was the opportunity for Derek Chauvin to allow the jury to decide whether or not those factors were successfully proven, but he waived that right at the end of the testimony and evidence in his case and told the judge he would be okay with the judge making that decision.
And now, Julia, the question I've been getting a lot from a lot of folks, what are the penalties that Chauvin could receive?
Minimum's
Let's first start
10
with
years.
the statute here in Minnesota for each of these crimes. On the books, the maximum penalty for that top charge against Derek Chauvin, which is second-degree unintentional murder. Rather, let's start with the sentencing guidelines, since that's what we're seeing on the screen. In Minnesota, there are guidelines that these judges do adhere to in most cases, and it makes sure that people are treated the same way who are similarly situated. So
Yeah,
for
it
second-degree
only
and
does so
third-degree murder,
much.
it's the same recommended sentence. It's 12.5 years in prison is the average for this range that goes from 10 years to 15 years. Judges have the discretion to go low on that or high on that. And this is based on a person's criminal history, which Derek Chauvin does not have a criminal history. So he's on the low end of what these guidelines recommend. Now, as far as how much time you would actually spend in prison, typically in Minnesota, if you're on good behavior, of that 12.5-year sentence, it would be about 8.3 years in prison, 4.2 years on parole. Now, for manslaughter, the sentencing is a bit different as far as the guidelines. 4 years in prison, 3.4 to 4.75 years, and the time that's actually in custody would be 2.6 years and 1.3 years out on supervised release on parole. So those are what this would be like if the judge just went based on the conviction and then looking at the sentencing guidelines. But in this case, like we talked about, those aggravating factors are in place. So the maximum under the statute is what could be a possibility if the judge finds that any of those aggravating factors, like George Floyd's
not a
vulnerability
theater mode
as
for
a
this?
victim, if he finds that the state proved those. So this is
Guess
a look
not.
at the maximum that the judge could go up to. Second-degree unintentional murder, 40 years is the max. For third-degree murder, 25 years, and for manslaughter, 10 years.
Yeah, so 10's the minimum.
Now, I've gotten a lot of questions about the maximum. Is he going to get the maximum 40 years?
I do not
unlike-
think
it's
he will get the
unlikely
maximum.
in this case, based
Yeah.
on his background, even with the aggravating factors, that he's going to get the maximum in this case.
Even though he's had 18 complaints in his 18
That's
years of
what we're
service and
hearing
has been
from
reprimanded
the
twice.
Legal experts here in Minnesota, they do say that judges want to make sure there's uniformity, and typically the max of the statutory sentencing is reserved for those who have a criminal background, who are repeat offenders and are engaged in
Defined
really
repeat
egregious
offender.
conduct. But
He's
ultimately, it's going to be
offended
up to
before.
Judge Peter Cahill on whether or not
And I know
he
I'm not talking
will
to these
go
people. I'm
towards the
obviously
40
talking to the
years
people
or something
who are
that's
handling the
closer
sentencing,
to
the judge, the
sentencing guidelines of 12.5
judicial
years
system in
as the
general.
average. But there are several factors that the state is arguing, so it's not just one, it's a total of 5, and all of that will be taken into consideration along with the mitigating factors that the defense will be arguing, saying that he deserves something much less.
All right, and Julia, what can you tell me about this Department of Justice probe into the Minneapolis Police Department and the death of George Floyd?
That's something that was announced today by the newly instated Attorney General of this country, Merrick Garland, who said that they're actually going to be opening a probe into the Minneapolis Police Department to look at their practices and how they handle things. We know the Department of Justice was already investigating this case since the time of George Floyd's death. They've been looking into the 4 officers involved, Derek Chauvin and his 3 co-defendants, and whether or not the civil rights of George Floyd were violated at the time of his arrest and death. Now we're seeing the expansion of that and a closer look by the federal government into Minneapolis Police Department as this entity that was responsible at the time for those 4 officers.
All right, Julia Janae, thank you so much for that report and for all your wonderful work during this trial. We'll let you go, but we'll be talking to you a little bit later this hour in the talkback. Right now, we do have to take a break. Now, when we come back, we have a lot more ahead for you in.
Cool. Cool. I am cautiously hopeful that Derek Chauvin will receive not obviously the maximum sentence, but an appropriate sentence. It's hard. I mean, it's so hard to say what an appropriate sentence is. And that's the thing. Justice is not revenge. Justice is not an eye for an eye. It's just punishment. So it's so hard to say what's appropriate. But I am cautiously optimistic that within the capabilities of the current judicial system in a quote-unquote appropriate sentencing will happen, and it will go on to pave the way to make prosecuting law enforcement officers who engage in this sort of behavior or in murders can be prosecuted easier and actually held accountable for their actions. The same way the rest of us are. But we're probably going to switch gears here. Switch to some gaming and stuff for a little bit. I'm going to step away for a moment, probably grab a granola bar, smoke a cigarette, and after that, I don't know. I'll figure out what we'll do. I'll figure out what we'll play. We'll play something. But yeah, be back in a bit.